All right, good afternoon. Hi, everybody. The lunch get to you a little bit? Hello, how's it going? All right, thank you. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Paul Yuknovich. I'm one of the group program managers at Microsoft. My team and my group, we work on the Azure tools and the Azure SDK. A lot of it's inside of Visual Studio, but a lot of it now is outside of Visual Studio too. So I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today. My alias, unfortunate for me, is Paul Yuck, so I don't mind if you call me that. That works. Or Yo also works. One thing I like to do at the beginning of these sessions is just to get to know you a little bit. So I prepared a little survey. And by the way, I was walking around and I did a survey. And the most common answer is, I want you to talk about everything, all of Azure. So I think I've got my work cut out for me. I want to understand kind of the makeup of who's in the room. So I understand this is getting started talk. So who's even kind of looked at Azure or dabbled with Azure at all? Okay, that's a lot of people. That's great. Who's using Azure for dev test right now? Okay, we're dropping down to about 20% maybe. How about using it in production? Okay, almost the same number of folks. Who's using Azure websites? Okay, almost everyone in that group. How about the new, who's looking at the new app service, an app service scenario? Okay, just a drop off of folks there. How about cloud services like web roles, worker roles, super high scale? Okay. How about VMs, virtual machines? Okay, about 20%. For those using VMs, are you using them for dev test? Okay, less hands. How about for production? SQL? Okay, Windows Server kind of stuff? Custom stuff that I'll never be able to guess? Okay, good. Who's using CI? Continuous integration, automation right now? Okay, just a few hands. That's good. We'll cover it today, so if you want to look at it. How about command line tools? Yeah, less hands still. Okay, how about other languages? And don't worry, I won't send security after you this time. Other languages like Java. Okay, some hands. Node.js. PHP, I guess we could consider that. Okay, sounds good. Who saw the Blackhawks game? Okay, some hands. Who saw the Boston versus New York? Who rooted for New York? Okay, I can't help with that. All right. Who watched Game of Thrones? Don't spoil it. Okay, a lot more people. Okay, excellent. My survey's done. Thanks so much. So getting down to business, what I want to talk to you about today, we're going to go through really getting started with Azure development using the Azure SDK. I'll talk about it a bit. The Azure SDK has a lot of components. It has IDE tools. There's tool services. There's command line stuff. There's APIs. There's really a lot there. So that goal of hitting everything is going to be a little daunting. And this is for ASP.NET developers. So a lot of you are coming in having worked with ASP.NET, and I want to look at Azure with an eye for what it's like, if you know ASP.NET and you're getting used to Azure, or you want to make more out of Azure. Okay, so the kind of things I'll talk about, I think based on what I saw from the hands, I will do just a little bit of overview, but start making I'm bored faces at me or snoring, and I'll move on from that. I won't do too much. Then we'll really do a bunch of, kind of getting started with all the different app types. I want to spend some time there. I want to spend some time on lifecycle and some of the things you can do to be successful moving through the application lifecycle. Then we'll go big into diagnostics and prevention. My team especially, we basically double down on our efforts to help you with diagnostics so that you can be really successful with a highly scalable, highly available, high-performance app. And we think that's a good place to invest. You guys think that's a good place to invest? Yes, okay. Tons of demos, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, sound good? We're in the right place? Excellent. So let's go to the overview. So the first thing, when we think about designing each version of the SDK, we've actually shipped, I'd have to do the math here, I should have done it ahead of time, I think about 18 versions of the SDK now, from 1.x, let's say up through 1.8, 2.0, now we're up to 2.6, and there are even some pre-release versions in there. So really it's all about just enabling developers to build and accelerate the use of Azure inside their applications. We've even broadened out from there, but we want to help you just make your life better doing dev tests using Azure if we can. We do the best we can to reach out, talk to you guys, listen to feedback. So here's one link that we always watch. Also, there's Yammer groups set up for this session. So please come find us. We'd love to talk to you about making these tools better for you. We ship super often. I've worked on lots of different, let's say, Visual Studio products that have shipped, as long as every 3 years apart. We ship about every 3 or 4 months with Azure SDKs, so for us that was pretty aggressive. Some things we're even doing sprintly, what I call it, so like every 3 weeks. That's been really fun. And we even do some projects now out in the open, out in GitHub with you guys, which we can kind of work on every day, and you can see improvements every day. So that's really thrilling to work on. Then there's different kind of dimensions of the SDKs, or different SDKs, which you'll see on Azure.com in downloads. There's versions for .NET. So .NET was the first SDK that we put out, and there's honestly more there right now. So we have SDKs always for about 2 versions of Visual Studio. So for Visual Studio 2012 and 2013, we did SDKs. Also, we like to keep up with a pre-release. So if there's RC out there right now for Visual Studio for 2015, so we did tools for that too. Then we also keep up a set of command line and PowerShell tools that make your life really great there. Then kind of for Java, I saw almost no hands, but just so you know, there are Eclipse and IntelliJ plugins. So if you guys work with different teams and departments, they can use Azure also, even if they're on Java, so that's good to know. And also we support Node, Python, Ruby. So sometimes that's a surprise to folks. The SDK, we literally just shipped it. Sarab, who's one of the PMs of my team, he's still coming off the hot seat for getting that thing out the door. So we just got that out. It's available for all 3 versions of VS that I talked about. So definitely go get it. You can even get it during the session if you want to. There's other options for you, which are pretty cool. So one thing we created, about 9 months ago, is we actually created images that are meant for developers up in Azure. So you can go create a virtual machine right now, and you'll see that you can create a Visual Studio 2013 community, or you can create a pre-release version. So basically, like, these are the things that are freely available to download. You can get those right now on VMs, and they're pre-installed with the SDK, and they're just really ready to go. So in about 5 to 8 minutes, you'll have one provisioned, and a minute later, you'll be up and developing on the new stuff. Also, if you guys have MSDN subscriptions, who has MSDN? Great. So definitely check that out. You have $150 or up to that in US dollars credits every month for Azure. So that's, you could run a decent sized VM running the whole time, which you probably don't want to do, but that's how much compute power you have. Corey Sanders broke it down to how many editions of Settlers of Catan you could buy with that much money, but I can't remember, something like 7.5. So anyway, definitely check that out. And we have more images. So you get the higher editions of Visual Studio in there, right? You get the Professional and Ultimate. You get client images. So really, no other cloud is authorized to do that. We actually have Windows 7, Windows 8.1 client. You can use those as test desktops in the cloud. So really cool stuff. Please go check that out. Actually, I'm curious, who's using those developer images in the cloud right now? Okay, so probably we haven't got the word out too much. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the platform, because knowing a bit about the platform helps us make sure we're looking at the right options. I'm going to do the best I can to position how I think about the different offerings for us, for ASP.NET developers. So the first thing I would absolutely check out, hands down, it's kind of like if you don't know where to start, definitely start with an app service. An app service is the newly improved, renamed website. So if you're familiar with websites, you're very familiar with app services. They just come with more stuff. There's 4 dimensions of app services. So there's web apps, like we think of for stateless web apps, stateless web APIs, the kind of apps that we build. There's specific API apps, which are really powerful. They expose even Swagger endpoints. They can have API management. And they have gateways in front of them. So a lot of the tough work with exposing an API to your company or to your customers is taken care of. There's mobile apps, right? So basically for any device, you can create something where a .NET client or a JavaScript client can consume your service. And then a logic app, which helps you build really durable workflows and have a really easy experience for that. So, where to start? Definitely start with app services. I'll spend a good amount of time today going through that. We'll go through the full life cycle with an app service. We'll diagnose one, see what that's all about. Going to another jump. So I would consider app service a PaaS, a platform as a service. It's really about IaaS and web hosting as a service. Cloud service gives you another level of control. Right? Cloud services lets you have different tiers or multiple layers, each one that has its own scaling behavior. So you could have different numbers of instances. And when I say instances, all I mean is just numbers of VMs. I can have different numbers of instances for each tier. I can scale each tier up or down independently. I can auto-scale each one independently. And that gives me more control to factor the application. And we see this a lot if you have a really highly scalable app, or if you have like a microservices kind of a pattern, that would be, or even IoT, that would be a common kind of a pattern. And cloud services is a very mature service. It's been out for several years. This week, or last week at Build, we just introduced Service Fabric, which is like the next generation PaaS platform, which is even more optimized for high scale, high reliability. And there's more management, like thinking about managing the health and the lifetime of your instances and making sure that that's all working super smoothly. It's what we use ourselves to run the Azure SQLDB service. So you can, we've learned the hard way what it's like to operate a service like that, and we can share that service with you. And if you see a lot of the demos and the use cases, you see a high attention to things like microservices, things that need orchestration, and you see a high attention to IoT, where you have just a ton of ingestion, a ton of compute. Okay? And then the last thing, there's just good old virtual machines, and those still make a lot of sense for different scenarios, right? Like we talk a lot about kind of air quotes lift and shift, right? If you have a workload and you just want to get it running on the cloud, kind of move into that operational expenses model. We have virtual machines. They look and feel a lot like a Hyper-V machine you have on premises. You can use Windows or Linux. And this gives you the ultimate most control over the VM. So if you need it completely custom, you've got that. And then the really cool thing, like if you saw Mark Rosinovich's talk last week, or maybe you'll get to see him this week, there's this new technology called Azure Resource Manager, or ARM. And Resource Manager gives you some of the benefits that we like in cloud services, like the ability to apply plugins and layer more things on top. And it also gives you a better developer model where things are declarative. So we'll spend some time and I'll show you that. And it makes working with VMs much, much better. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'd say everyone, you can do an awful lot with it. And actually, it really scales. And then these other options are good when you have very specific kinds of workloads or when you need specific kinds of control. And that's how I would position it. Okay. So what else? There's a set of foundational services that also we need to deliver on different solutions. So I always think of like storage as like air. You can't have an application really without storage of some kind. And thinking about the cloud design point, unless we kind of really know what we're doing, keeping state in the virtual machines isn't a particularly good idea because the virtual machines can go up and down, they can get wiped out. So you want to use something like a storage service where the storage is managed, it's backed up, it's constantly available, and that's kind of separated from your compute. So that's definitely something you want to use. So we have blobs, which are basically for files. We have tables, which are just like an abundant storage of NoSQL style data. And we have queues for messaging. The most kind of common application pattern that I see with a distributed app is having consumers and having senders and having some kind of messaging loop in between, right? So common scenario might be I'm processing orders. So I have a front end, which would be like an app service, web app. it's sending orders from the front end, and then those are being queued up, and then you have a back-end system that's processing that work. And because you've kind of separated the concerns that way, you're more able to build a scalable solution. Also, we have our own SQL managed service. It's our relational database as a service. We manage it for you. We keep it up for you. We back it up for you. So there's a lot of good things like that. Also, if you want more control, the most common virtual machine type that I see get used is actually SQL on a virtual machine, and that's a super common pattern. So you guys can all do that too. Other things that I'll point out: we have a higher level NoSQL or document-based database as a service. That's DocDB. I would go check that out. For those of us who work in a corporate setting, who have a login or org accounts, there's Active Directory, or Azure Active Directory. So it's Active Directory as a service. It can federate with your on-premises system, or you can use it for all of your cloud apps, right? Then next thing, think about media and CDN, right? So there's a lot of media that we work with. There's streaming and kind of scenarios like that that are pretty gnarly to do. Or there's just caching for our content. And so we have a set of services that will help you with that. And then the last thing, when you move into more of this kind of services model, more of this cloud design point, you need to have constant streams of analytics to figure out how are you doing, how are your users doing, how's your business doing, how's the health, what are the issues, right? And kind of unlike box software, your SLA will really require you to keep a good eye on it. So we have great services that'll help you with that. So thinking about App Insights and other services that we have. So that gives you, that's my super quick platform overview. Hopefully that helped. Any super quick questions? Yep.
You made an analogy with the app service, web app service, that can scale. You don't really need a virtual machine unless you're trying to do something higher level.
Right. Completely custom, I'd say virtual machines let you do something completely custom. It's good for like a brownfield solution. And if you're gonna start something from scratch, I would definitely look at app services. And I don't see scalability as a differentiator between the two.
Does that same that's good. Thank you. That's very good. Does that same rule apply to your SQL as a service versus a SQL running a virtual machine? Does that same analogy hold?
That's a great question. You have to do more work to manage the scale behavior on a virtual machine. You have to do more work, whereas the managed service will scale automatically for you. Both can achieve the same level of scale, but it's going to take you a lot more work with a virtual machine. It's a great question. Any other questions? It takes guts to speak up in a big room. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to close PowerPoint for a bit, and let's kind of go look at some stuff. So the first thing I want to show you, let's just take a walk through websites and app services done in ASP.NET, and go through a little bit of a life cycle all the way through it, just to get our feet wet and see, kind of take a tour of what there is to work with. So I'm going to switch over to my demo machine. There's nothing more thrilling and exciting than doing live demos against the cloud on a convention network. Okay. Truly nothing more exciting. All right, so I'm in Visual Studio. This is 2015 RC, so everyone please go get it if you haven't gotten it already. If you don't have a machine you can trash, just go ahead and get that virtual machine. You can try it up on that thing. Or you can also get ISOs and throw it on a local VM. So quick tour around here. The first thing, you'll see that I'm logged in on the top right-hand side. This is actually Visual Studio's way of signing in, and that establishes your user profile so that all of your settings, key bindings, all that kind of stuff roam around with you. But we've also tapped into that with our Azure tooling. So our Azure SDK and our Azure tooling know, hey, like that p-yucks at Hotmail, there's actually an Azure account sitting behind that, and that Azure account even has MSDN. So anytime you sign in, we'll now connect basically your Azure account automatically. And so you can see that here in account settings. So we automatically add your Azure accounts, and you can actually add one or many. So we call this like a keychain. We keep a keychain of all of your associations. And even when you roam and go to another machine, we remember that you had a connection at one point to that account or to that subscription. We won't roam the passwords or the tokens. That's kind of bad news. But so we'll roam that association, and then you can go to another machine, just simply sign in, and you're back up and running that quick. So that's pretty cool. And we made some improvements to this too. We're working on it all the time, but it turns out there's a lot of different kinds of accounts out there. There's these like multi-headed accounts that are both an org account and a Microsoft account. So we've been working through that, but hopefully you'll find it's getting better and better. Another place I would look kind of as a home base, all of the connected tooling that we have is in Server Explorer in Visual Studio. So there's an Azure node. I take a look here. You can manage and filter subscriptions. And we're going to see that same keychain of user accounts that I have. So this is my corporate one, and this is kind of the one that I use all over the place, including home. And you'll notice that there's a one-to-many relationship. So each account will bring in a set of subscriptions. Subscriptions are kind of like the billing units that you can expect in Azure. And also you tend to see that departments and different things will be partitioned with different subscriptions. So this gives you a lot of control, and based on your feedback, a lot of people who've been using Azure for a bit realize you really get a lot of resources, a lot of services in Azure, and something like an Explorer, which is a flat tree, will get unwieldy pretty quick. So one thing I would just mention, you can always kind of go through this dialog. You can uncheck accounts, you can uncheck subscriptions, you can even uncheck regions, and that'll really focus in the tooling, remove a bunch of noise, so you can just focus on what you care about. So that's something we put in pretty recently based on feedback. I would recommend using the accounts to sign in because the model that we in Azure are moving to is more about RBAC, or roles-based access control. And basically, based on different roles, accounts can do different things. Some people can deploy, some people can delete, some people can view, some people can't do anything. So the accounts will get you set up to work in that RBAC style world. But just so you know, there's also certificates, and those have been around for a long time. And if you choose to or need to work with certificates, all of our tooling still works with that also. And I understand there's reasons why. Actually, it would be a great kind of topic after the session to hear why you still need to use it, just so I can keep that straight in my head. But you have those options. Okay. And then inside Server Explorer, virtually all of the services that you work against as an ASP.NET developer, those are all right here. And what we focused on is we focused on a set of really developer actions, right? So you're not going to get everything here you would see in the management portal. In some cases, all you'll see is a hyperlink that takes you deep into the portal for that same thing, so that you can delete and do that kind of management stuff. But as a developer, we care more about things like testability. We care about creating something so you can develop against it, right? So if I take the example of a storage account, I can drill into my storage account. I see my blobs. I can see my images. That's always a hoot to look at that, right? And then you can read, write, add, remove, do things in bulk. You can do searches. And kind of think about it this way. So you're developing an app. Your app is working against a service like storage, and data itself is part of the test and is part of the app, right? So like if I'm processing a set of images, I might expose myself to different bugs or different behaviors by having different data, right? So you can think about these are good tools for really quick side-by-side testing of your app, and you never have to leave Visual Studio even to do it. Let's take a different example. So I could look at a web app. So let's expand this guy. And one cool thing is we're just dynamically looking in all your subscriptions, right? So I could look in, here's a web app I did this morning. I can make really quick changes to the files. As a developer, we all need to deal with some diagnostics, so I can look at my log files. And then if I right-click, the most common developer actions that we think, like let's go browse the app. We can go attach a remote debugger. That's pretty sweet. View the streaming logs, open the management console, download profile. So as you can see, there's just a bunch of things you can do, all really focused on developers inside of Server Explorer. And all of that's driven off of the login and subscription management that I showed you before. All right, so let's go do something slightly more interesting. Let's create an app. And as an ASP.NET developer, there's probably at least 2 places I would focus on for starters. I'd look at the web node and the web projects. So the ASP.NET team fondly calls this the one ASP.NET template. So that's probably the one we want to look at a lot of the time. So that's clearly one. Also, if we go to the cloud node, you can see that that's building out more and more every day. So the different kinds of apps and services that we talked about just a few minutes ago, they're here, right? So cloud service, that kind of multi-layered, highly scalable paths, that's here. I see the web application. I see web jobs. That's a really good thing for quick back-end logic based on certain triggers or certain conditions. I can do mobile apps so that both mobile callers, JavaScript callers can all call it. And then I see that kind of new way to work with IaaS virtual machines called Azure Resource Manager, or ARM. We're going to get to that. But you can do all of those from here. Another thing that we did, if you're interested in any particular service, we created a set of quick starts, pretty much one-to-one, one for each logical service in the main use case or the main task for that. So I'd go check that out. I think that's a really easy way to just get started, try each of the services. Also, we separately released the Service Fabric SDK and tools. So if you'd like to evaluate that service, you can go ahead and do that here. So let's start out. Let's go back to web. Let's pick a web application. Some things you'll notice here is that as we go through the workflow, we can actually start using developer services and cloud services even as a part of just dev test. So whether or not this application even will ultimately go into production in Azure, I can still use things like App Insights, or I can still use dev test clusters inside of Azure just to get through my dev test phase, right? And that's super handy because you have a reliable, exactly the same kind of environment that you can spin up over and over and over again. And when you're done, you can turn it off and you stop paying, right? And so what we're seeing is that a lot of developers and a lot of companies are able to kind of reduce their spends on labs and on data centers because they're able to use dev test more and more, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll turn on App Insights. That'll help me with usage analytics and monitoring. And then the next thing is it'll kind of say, hey, what kind of project do I want to use? And everyone here is coming from an ASP.NET background, so you know that. But some of the new things I'll show you, I could use, of course I could use MVC, or I could use web forms, or I could use web APIs. But we're seeing some new things like the mobile apps and the app service pieces showing up. And just so there's no confusion, there's a little bit of a funny state that we're in 2015 RC. So if you want the full experience right now with app services, you should actually use Visual Studio 2013. And 2013 plus SDK 2.6 will give you all the features. If you're looking in RC, just because of the timing and kind of the timing physics, it's not all there. You can use an awful lot of it, but it's not all there. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But so let's just do, we'll do a straight MVC app. And you will still see, here's a part that came through. I can deploy now, by default, this MVC app into a web app container or into an app service container. So the way I think about that is you always have the ability to sort of start up your application in the context of the cloud, ready to deploy into the cloud just for dev test. It's kind of like, today we have an IaaS box under our desk, or we have our local machine, and IaaS is always the thing that we're deploying to. But now you can get a little bit more production realism by actually using the cloud, and it's all set up for you. Couple cool other things. I won't show it today, but you could deploy the same web app to a virtual machine. And Visual Studio will actually configure that virtual machine to have web deploy ports enabled and to be development ready. So any virtual machine can basically be a dev test environment for you as well. And that gives you complete control over the software that you have on it. And one of the things I hope to highlight later, we can even use Docker containers. So let's use a web app. All right, I'll use my MSDN subscription. I'm burning through my $150. I could, of course, always create a new SQL server, even on Azure, if I want to. We'll skip that just for a second so I don't do too many things at once. So we'll go create this app. I need to add some more images. All right. It just took a bit because it was a little nervous about being on stage. All right, so here we go. We got our web app. We're adding all kinds of NuGet package goodness. And in a second, what you're also going to see is we're going to create a set of what I call lifecycle assets. But basically, you get the configuration and code that enables you to deploy and even automate the deployment and move through an automated workflow for DevOps. We thought that was incredibly important. So here, here's my ordinary vanilla MVC app, and on the side we have this publish scripts folder, and it's got things like multiple configurations expressed as a JSON file. Right? In here, what I would do in my dev environment, I would express a number of settings, passwords, endpoints. Do I want tests to run, that kind of stuff. I would define that here in this file. And then I could create more of these files for different environments. So I could create, a test or a dog food environment. I could create a pre-prod one. I could create a production one. So this really sets you up with a pattern to work through the workflow. It even allows more of an opt-down kind of ops setting so that an ops manager could have their own settings file that only they have that sits under lock and key, and they can inject it in the pipeline later. It'll be completely compatible with the app. You won't have to rewrite any code or change any code in your app. So that's one thing. I should show you this too. So we always have an easy experience based on this. So remember how we picked to set up an app service web app. So this application is pre-configured now just to push it immediately into the cloud. So let's hit publish. That's web deploying into the cloud. I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to download publish settings, none of that stuff. Setting ACLs, all kinds of good stuff. Right. And just like that, it's really that simple to get any kind of a web workload immediately going for dev test into the cloud and to go deeper into the cloud from that point. So let's look at the automation side of this too, right? So let's imagine we're way beyond Hello World. We've done development on our app. It's a little while later. And, or it might be from the beginning. I know a lot of developers and dev managers who think it's important to have a mature automation set up from the get-go. So either way, you have these scripts that we've created for you as a starting point, and they're actually pretty solid. If you look at it, this is definitely not a Hello World kind of a script. So this script will do the push through web deploy and through Azure Service Management to actually do the same exact thing that our publish dialogues did just through script. And it'll use and honor the same config files. And we've even factored some of the logic away into a module. And we give this to you so that A, you have it and understand it, and B, you can customize it and even check it into source code management or into GitHub so that all of your changes for your company, for your app, stick with you. So that's a pretty cool thing, the kind of thing we should keep doing? Yep. All right. And then, awesome. So let's go ahead and let's go a little crazy, slightly crazy. Let's grab a command prompt. Which one do I want to do? I usually like the 64-bit one. Let's use this one. Okay, so the key here is I want a command prompt that has MS build in the path. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a package And then we have a unit that's deployable, that's also savable in a depot. And then what we're going to do is we're going to push it to Azure. So functionally, this is the exact same thing that our UI does. So let's go ahead and we'll lift the path to this solution. Okay. And what we're going to do is build the package. I don't know if you've done too much with a command line Microsoft build for Visual Studio, but there's a set of targets. Targets know how to build different kinds of project types. And there are specific targets that can do specific actions. So in this case, we want to do a package action. And what we also want to do, we want to pass in a few properties. Think of these like parameters into the task. And we want to override a few things. So we could say something like the package location isn't wherever it's going to put it in some object bin folder where I'll certainly never find it in this session. I'll put it someplace easy like C drive/drops. Okay. And I think I want to do this too. We'll go ahead and kick that off. Let's just make sure it's still on the path. Of course, if you spell it, right? Okay, that's a feature I want to ask for in MS Build, spell check. So let's kind of build up from here. Let's do... Okay, so in this case, we're building up the web deploy package. I was pretty sure it was package location. Did I get that wrong, anyone? What's that? There we go, thanks. All right. Always good to have folks helping me out. I'll take all the help I can get. All right, so we got a nice drop. Now the interesting thing, an MS Build package is just a zip file with good stuff and manifests in it. And now that we have that file, we can go ahead and work with a PowerShell. One thing I want to call out, and we just added this in the RC. So there's a gentleman in the community and an MVP named Adam Driscoll. He made PowerShell tools, which are really sweet. They're open source. They're in the VS Gallery. And we partnered with him to add just a few features to it, so it's really good for web and cloud developers. And we added 64-bit support. We added like kind of a REPL. We had all kinds of goodies, so I would definitely check that out. So now what you're getting is a colorized IntelliSense REPL-enabled PowerShell editor, just one click away inside of Visual Studio 2015 RC. And you get this PowerShell interactive window. So as long as we set the path right, so let's kind of do that again. Pardon me? Thank you. Minute to learn and a lifetime to master. Oops, that was double quotes. Okay, and then we can basically drop some form of this example pretty much right in. I'm getting colorization in IntelliSense even in the REPL, which is pretty sweet. So let's kind of check everything out. Is this the right script? Yep. It's web application 6 config. And again, I could override the configs if I want to. And then that's not where the web deploy package is. I think it's in here. And by the way, you could use a UNC share or something like that. Was it drop or drops? You remember? Singular. Thanks. All right. Yep. Thanks. Haha, we have to keep debugging. There's disagreement on the singularity of it. Oh my boy. It's always dangerous doing this one. So, yeah, let's...
The script isn't, I think it's the location of the script. It says you have published scripts, but I don't...
Yeah, it's in that folder. We're doing my diagnostics demo slightly early. So, like that better? And now I heard drops again. Still disagreement on that. Guys kill me. We'll give it one more shot here. I think my paths are all messed up. There we go. You gotta have a little faith. Okay, so anyway, what we just showed you there, a little bit more clunkily than I hoped to, but we give you the building blocks to really do absolutely everything in the tool from the command line, and that's been a core tenet for the last few releases of what we've done. And then what you can think about, these assets will work really well today in your own automation. They'll work well with any continuous delivery tools that you have, whether that's Visual Studio or even TeamCity. And we already created tasks inside of the Azure portal and inside of Visual Studio Online that can ingest these configurations and actually deploy on your behalf. So there's all different points of customization. You have complete control. It's all checked into source code management, and you're ready to automate from the get-go. All right? Pretty cool? So let's do something different now. Let's switch gears. And here's some code and some tips. I probably should have read the tips before doing it. That's one thing I didn't show here too as a step, but you do have to sign in with the PowerShell SDK session at least once. So you use that add Azure account commandlet and then just select a subscription as your default, and from there everything will work. Also check your execution policy. All right. All right, so the next thing, let's do something a little bit more interesting. So I mentioned, we have a core service like App Service. We have websites, but we want to connect to other foundational services that we have, like storage. So let's go back and take a peek at that. All right, we'll use the same web application. So one thing that we've done, you can always just go ahead and add a NuGet package, like a lot of us are familiar with today. But what I want to do is use a newer enhanced feature called Connected Services. And Connected Services are kind of like NuGet packages on steroids, where they actually know about the service connection inherently. And we bring down patterns and configurations for you so you can make that connection. And basically the goal we talk about is we want it to be as easy as possible to write that first transactional line of code against a service. And we try to, I won't say eliminate, but we try to help you accelerate all the stuff in the way and still leave you with something that's not a toy and that you can use. Right, so we have different vendors on the left. Right now we currently have Microsoft and we have Salesforce. This is open and there's even an SDK. So this is pluggable. If you guys work on cloud services, you can certainly add stuff there. So let's work with something like storage. And let's go ahead and add that. So I just click it, configure. As a next step, this experience is going to look into your subscription again, and it's going to find all kinds of eligible storage accounts. You could sort it by subscription. You could sort it by region to help keep it straight. So here's the one I'll use here. It's in the West US. It's co-located near my application itself, which is what I want. It's in the same subscription, so it'll be in the same billing boundary. So we'll go ahead and add that. And, this dialog will do a few things. It's going to add that NuGet package and any customizations that NuGet brings. But it's also going to basically scaffold out configuration and helpers that let you call this thing easily. And kind of like the pattern I showed you with the publish scripts, we'll make sure that anything that you want to change is externalized into a config setting and not burnt into your code. So that just helps you set up with a best practice by default. And then, believe it or not, one of the best features I think about this is it comes with the doc that just gives you a bit of context, and then it gives you a bunch of drag and drop snippets where you can just, here's how we set up the namespaces, here's how we get the connection string, and then common tasks, creating containers, uploading, enumerating, deleting, etc. So rapidly gets you to writing that first line of transactional code and then doing all the next steps after it. Another thing, we'll take a page out of that book. So if I create another app, we'll race through this. But I do want to start over to show you something. So pick an MVC app. In this case, you'll notice that MVC apps have a default authentication. In this case, I want to use no authentication, and I want to use a more custom experience that we now provide through connected services. So we can right-click on the app, and we can now configure Azure AD authentication, right? So if you want to have this app be behind a sign-in, that sign-in is governed by Azure AD, you can just go through this process, right? And then what we'll do is some of the tough things here, you can pick and configure the domain that you want to use. So I have an org tenant inside of Microsoft, but here's one that I set up in my own subscription, Polyuk Enterprises. And then I can create a new application for this tier. So I don't know if you play that much with Azure AD or kind of any OpenID kind of a technology, but basically on the server, you always need a server's registration of an application to go with the actual application. And so that you get some basic app level authentication. And then after that, you can enforce user level authentication too. So we're going to create an application, the domain here. And then I can also kind of decide who should have access to it. Should there be read directory data or not? And then just go do finish. And if we haven't signed in, I believe it's in this tenant. Oh, two-factor auth. That ta-da is going to take a while because I silenced my phone. So let's have trust in me for one more step here. It's not happy with me because I've been calling from hotel rooms and all different kinds of things. So it's going to keep challenging me. Actually, let's try one thing. I do have a virtual smart card. Come on. Let's live dangerously. Yeah, that's not going to work. But there's really an awful lot. For those of you who've set up, we actually have a joke about this, but for those of you who've set up AD, I mean, there's a chunk of work and there's a chunk of knowledge and a lot of configuration, almost 27 steps that you have to do. So this really, really saves you a bunch of time and leaves you with a config that you can go simply change. Of course, the original authentication has to work. And then the same kind of an idea. We leave you with some snippets of code. So if you want to add sign-in into a web experience, you can go ahead and learn how to do that. And then the same thing, I have configurations that get saved in a JSON file for me. So hopefully that makes your life a lot better working with AD and getting connected. We actually see it's kind of one of the fastest growing connections that people are making right now. So that was connecting to services. And we just got to recap on that. So it makes it quick. And there's an SDK available for anyone who wants to create one. So now let's switch gears into app services. So, kind of a quick reminder There's 4 different styles of microservices or services within an app service. Web is probably the one we're most familiar with. Mobile is kind of intuitive. Logic is about workflows. APIs are about managed APIs. So you actually get API management to go with your API. It's highly scalable. So again, scalability is not the pivot of the service. It's more about how finished the service is. This service is highly optimized for app workloads for these 4 scenarios. Another really cool thing is there's connectors to really common SaaS systems. You have to go check out online. But most of the common SaaS systems that you might be working with or you might be associated with are starting to show up in the gallery. And we've even partnered with BizTalk to make sure that the BizTalk connectors work well in these scenarios. And the great thing about these connectors are it's not just kind of an interface level connection that you're making. It's a very reliable pipe to that SaaS service. And to write that kind of code to have a reliable connection to a SaaS service is a bit of work. And so this app service does that work on your behalf. We monitor it and we maintain that inside of Microsoft. So keeping that pipe reliable is also a feature in itself of the service. So let's go check it out. What I want to do is I want to show you what it looks like to build an app service, and then what I want to do is consume it, because there's really cool ways now that you can consume an API app, which I think are even easier than a web API or other things we've done. So, all right, so let's come back here. Now, what I want to do, let's pull a rabbit out of the hat. So I mentioned that that we have these VMs in the cloud. I'm actually going to use one, and it'll be a little bit trippy because we're going to be from Visual Studio and spawn another Visual Studio. Taking just a second on this network. All right, I think I already had it. I had it open. What I was going to show you, and it'll happen in a second, the VM will expand, and I can right-click and say connect via remote desktop, which takes me right here to remote desktop connection. It's already filled in. We'll go connect. And this is an actual VM in the cloud, so it's .cloudapp.net. I'll show you since it's here. So here's the VM. I can right-click on it and say connect using remote desktop. Then we're here. Now, why am I doing this? Not just to show off the VMs in the cloud, but also because I mentioned VS 2013 with update 4 and with the SDK 2.6 is going to give you the best experience, just point in time, for app services. And when we come out of RC into the RTM of Visual Studio 2015, I expect that gap to close. But for now, I'm just kind of truth in advertising. You're going to have a better experience on this kind of a build. Okay, so we're using that VM. Let's go create a new project. We'll create web, ASP.NET web application. Okay, now I'm seeing more stuff show up here. So I'm seeing the API app in addition to the web apps that I can use and the mobile apps. So we'll go ahead and pick that. Host in the cloud is also something we're working on. Because it's preview, we haven't kind of enabled that checkbox, but you can still publish, so don't worry if that's grayed out right now. So we'll create this API app. Now, there's kind of 2 workflows that I would think about at this point, because again, you're dealing with something where the container has services behind it, and you want to provision and configure those services so that you have the right level of logging, the right level of API management. So in this case, I'll work in conjunction with a portal. So we'll go here. And this is the new portal. So we'll go browse. And I've already created an API app. I provisioned it in Azure. And you would just do that from new app service API app. I did that for the sake of time. It just takes about a minute. And then there's a number of configurations that you can do and things that you kind of get by default. So I can see that there's already monitoring experiences that are enabled on requests, the request logs, on errors, on the HTTP handling. You get different kinds of perf counters. So you get CPU and that kind of usage. And that's all stuff that's built into the API. So you get some level of API management automatically. And then there's another set of API management services for like throttling and for RBAC that you also get as a part of this, which you should check out. It's way too much to go into for getting started talk. But that stuff is kind of configured by default. And then if I look in the settings, just for the easy purposes of demo, what I've done is I've changed automatic updates to be on, and I've allowed the access to be wide open to the public, just so that we don't go through kind of any authentication experience. But actually, the cool thing is that authentication is built into this kind of a service, and that's really a lot of code, again, to do on your own, and it's scary kind of code to build into a service, so it's really handy that that's built into the API service. So that thing's already provisioned, and now I've got, I mean, if you're familiar with the standard web API template or app service template, we have a controller. The controller returns values. You can return kind of a collection of values. You can look up any particular value. So we'll just work with this sample. We'll go ahead and publish it. And in this case, I want to publish it as an API app, and that'll give me special kind of features and configurations to treat it like an API app. The dialog will then look into my service. I can see that API app that we provisioned. And if I didn't have one, I could create one directly from Visual Studio. And then we'll basically import all the settings that you need, all the ports, and even a GUID, nice, password and all that kind of stuff. I love it when the connection works. Okay. And then we can go ahead and deploy. Again, you're seeing that config as code show up here. Okay, publish succeeded. Now there's actually a gateway microservice that sits in front of the API, so that's, don't worry about that. It's an API app after all, so you probably, right, you'd call it more like that. Or maybe I will worry about it. Let's just give it one more push. Oh, you know what I did? And this comes up a lot. I've been publishing to this thing in the past. And so what I needed to remember to do, I believe, was this guy. Remove additional files. That way it's not in a corrupt kind of mixed mode state. Good news is web deploy is super fast. There we go. And now it's returning JSON. Okay, so we know the API is up and running. So now let's go ahead and add a test client to this. And we talk about this is accessible from any kind of a client. Like you could think about .NET clients. You can even think about JavaScript clients. So like let's take a classic here. I feel like looking at the classics. So we're going to go to Windows Desktop. Let's add a WinForms app. Sweet. All right, so we'll take this, take a button, take a text box, we'll make that multi-line. All right. And now what I want to do in this WinForms app, I'm going to add, and I can add this API app client. And again, this is like point in time for the preview. We'll make it look more like that connected services experience because that's what we think it should be. But right now it's its own little standalone tool. And what I can do is I can look at the different API apps in my subscriptions. You can kind of think about now this is a little bit of a directory of the APIs that you have in your company, or at least within the team boundary that should see it. I can discover that app, and I can add it. And this API app, it's a RESTful service, and usually you don't think about it having a lot of metadata. But the cool thing is API apps create Swagger and Swagger endpoints. So it does describe how the API needs to be called. And we use that Swagger information to basically code gen based on a template what you would expect in your client. So now I see here I'm getting the interfaces for things like my values, and I'm getting the client, and I'm even getting some models, and I'm getting some extension classes. So a super cool thing. Now it's kind of as easy as a service reference to bring in a RESTful style web API and app service. One other cool thing, I don't know if you caught it, but this guy, you can even just have your own custom Swagger metadata file, and you can consume any Swagger endpoint this way as well. So this gives you even more interoperability with the tooling. Pretty cool? Okay. Yay, thanks. That's good. It's too early in the day for me to start drinking. So let's go on to the next thing. So let's talk about DevOps with some of the remaining time we have. And let's talk about that Azure resource management, and I want to talk about Docker. I already sort of showed you PowerShell. So let's take you straight back into a demo. Audio, there we go. So when I want to work with Azure Resource Manager, there's almost two starting points I would think about. The easiest one is inside of Visual Studio. So I go to Cloud, and I pick this Azure Resource Group. And again, just for context, what I'm trying to do here is define not just one resource, but I want to define a complete topology for my application to run in. So I'll create a resource group. And now what you can see is a set of dynamic templates that have different kinds of topologies. So as an ASP.NET developer, we'd see what we expect. There's like web or web and SQL. There's also different kinds of virtual machine types. And even going down to different kinds of workloads like Ubuntu, which can run .NET Core, which you've seen in the announcements, or blank templates. There's just a bunch of different curated starting points. Another thing is that we announced a GitHub repo where a lot of additional templates will live. And there's an experience where you can just open that inside of Visual Studio. You can deploy it from GitHub right into Azure, or you can open any of the files and inspect it. So, different ways to get into it, but we really think it's important to give you scenario-based templates so you have the right starting point, and then you can go customize it. So let's pick a web app. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to give you, again, that kind of config as code, where in this case, everything starts with a JSON file. So the topology, the set of resources that I'm going to use are all defined in this JSON file. Let me make it a little bigger. Now, if you're like me, you might be thinking, that's a lot of JSON to deal with right away. What am I getting into? So the cool thing we did is we added this JSON outline where it gives you a much more logical view over the resources. It's like, oh, okay, I have a website, and that's what the markup for a website looks like. I have a hosting plan, which defines kind of the SKU and the billable side of this. And I have a set of analytics rules. And so that makes it already much easier to navigate and think about this ARM topology. And what I also have is a set of parameters. So as a best practice, we know that things like the site name and the DNS name and the size will change from app to app. They'll change from dev to test to production, right? So we basically externalize these things as parameters. And what you can do, let's look at the full picture. This param.dev.json again gives you the pattern where you can define pre-configured configurations for dev or test or different machines. So a couple use cases I would think about. One is I have one application and I want to move it through the complete life cycle. So I'd create a dev file, I'd create a test file, I'd create a pre-prod, and then somewhere I'd have a prod, probably in a secure database. what I could also do is I could share the same website template. I could kind of beef it up so it looks exactly like the way a website needs to look in my company. And then I can include this template for all of the web applications that I want to use in my company. And I make sure that when I stand up a website, it always gets stamped out and looks exactly the same. So you can think about, by doing this declarative model, it gives you a lot of reuse, and it gives you a lot of control and source code control. And then the same thing, once you actually want to go ahead and push this file, we have a PowerShell file that makes that push really straightforward. And for those of you who want an easier experience, we have a deploy UI as well. We just pick the subscription. Actually, we'll use Mike's subscription. See if he's watching this right now. We'll create a new resource group. Okay, and then you can select the template. You can select which parameters file and go ahead and deploy it. One thing here, any empty parameters, since we didn't fill it in this dev.json file, we could just go type that in now. So let's do hello Mike from Chicago. I'll put it in West US. All right. Now, one thing you're seeing here, this is about the first time we've done it. Not only do we offer a PowerShell path that mirrors exactly what our Visual Studio UI tools can do, but in this case, we actually use the PowerShell file. So as you make customizations and you put your own heavy lifting, you change some of the behaviors, the publish UI will actually pick that up and be driven by it. Do we think that's a good idea? Pretty cool. So, like, you could actually write code for Visual Studio itself just by changing that file. Right, and at this point, we're going to provision the website, and you always get good optics. And it's, again, it's not going to be called Web Apps here. It's called App Service because of the rename. But you can go to Server Explorer to just get optics inside of Visual Studio about what's being deployed. Okay? And that one should show up here any minute. I didn't pick a default plan that I liked. Okay, so that was App Services in a nutshell, and then Azure RM in a nutshell. One more thing I'll show you is if we go back here, what if I want to customize this thing? So what I can do, I can even right-click on the resources, and I can just go ahead and add a resource. So let's add a SQL database. And I'm basically kind of mocking up exactly what I want here. So I'll call it PaulDB Ignite. That was a MySQL database. I actually didn't want to do that. Let's try that again. Knew that was too simple. Was that a SQL database? There we go. Way more cool. PaulDB. And a SQL database wants to be homed on a server. So no problem. We can just make one of those too. Okay. And you can see very quickly the tool works with you to build up and scaffold based on the resources you need. Everything that's in here is also based on odd-in-line templates and snippets, so it'll be very dynamic. We'll keep adding to it. We'll keep enhancing it. This editor has a lot of IntelliSense. The IntelliSense and the validation is all driven by an online schema as well. So even as more resource providers and more services come online, you'll keep seeing IntelliSense and validation get better and better and better because we're driving it off of the server. So that's just one way of our tools to kind of not have too much drift with the cloud. So that's Azure Resource Manager. I would definitely see a lot more about it this week. Not only can you do websites in SQL, but also there's been a lot of work to have compute, networking, and storage. So if you want to have an entire kind of IaaS-style application with custom VMs, you can now do that as well. And there's a number of templates that are really interesting. Like even there was a DataStax template that I saw if I want to have a DataStax-style database. Okay, so that was Azure Resource Manager. And, oh, Docker. I want to show you that too, just real quick. Who's using Docker today? Anyone? Okay, well, let me show you just one quick reason why it might be interesting to give it a chance to look at. So let's take a new application. We'll do a new ASP.NET web application. In this case, I'm going to go down and I'll use ASP.NET v5. There's really a lot of good reasons. It's cloud optimized. It's really lightweight. It's got a really lightweight dev experience. You can save and changes take place immediately. So lots of good stuff going on here. But also it gives us access to .NET Core. And if you've been following the announcements, .NET Core not only runs on Windows, but it also runs on Linux. So the same application now that you can build that's very lightweight, very high density, can now be ported to a number of different servers that you have available out there in high density. So kind of think about, we're used to VMs, right? A VM takes a while to provision, and sometimes that's an expensive way to use a machine. Whereas Docker, think of that almost like processes. I have much smaller containers that live inside that VM. I can have much more of them, and they're much faster to build up. And so if I want to go through this dev, test, production loop, I have a very portable application that describes its own dependencies and can move through entirely rapidly, and it just makes the experience really slick, right? So what I'll do is I'll take this application, I'll publish this one, and I see that like I have web apps and other things as an option, I now have Docker containers. And you can deploy it to any kind of a Docker host, anything with a Docker engine. What we do is we give you this button that will create a virtual machine that's basically a Docker cluster or a Docker host, and it has everything pre-installed for you. But what we're using underneath in the tools, just so you know, we're using the actual Docker client with the actual Docker engine. So this is 100% compatible with Docker. It's not some proprietary kind of different container thing here, right? And then I have this Docker container host that I made. And if I have a custom host, I could even switch this here and put in my own parameters to find it. Hit OK. And it's kind of set up the process to talk to the Docker host in the cloud. We'll validate the connection. Let's try my other host real quick.
So Docker is .NET Core?
Docker, the question is Docker .NET Core? Docker today supports .NET Core because what's supported in Docker must be supported in the host also. And so I'm going to do this on Linux. So to do it on Linux, I need to use .NET Core. That's the only reason. Does that make sense? Okay. And by doing this, it's a little bit of Docker innards, but what we need to do is make a package. It's almost like sysprep, for those of you familiar with that, where you understand the dependencies, you take away information that can't be stamped around, and it creates a package. And then that package can be layered on top of another package which describes a Linux container. And then all of that gets pushed and instantiated, and just, it takes about a minute for the first Docker package. And then a subsequent change will take just a second or two. And I'm really down to the wire with about a minute left in the session. Any other questions about this while it's publishing? All right. I might do I'll pop back quickly once it's done. So I left you with a number of slides so you can go back and kind of think about it. There are a number of diagnostics tools that I want you to check out if you can. I think the most interesting things in Server Explorer, we have logs, streaming logs, and live remote debugging set up. We've also, if you're working with PaaS services, we have built-in diagnostics tools, and we have a GitHub project that gives you Kibana and Elasticsearch, and basically that'll give you a better experience for viewing and searching diagnostics at scale. We have some really cool videos that you should check out. And we have something called Azure Code Analysis. So it's a code analyzer built on top of 2015 and Roslyn. And we can find conditions where maybe you've done something that's okay in ASP.NET but not super great for the cloud. We have a set of rules. We'll give you guidance, or we'll even help you fix it. And so I've included information on that. And just to summarize, so what you've seen, I was challenged to show everything in Azure and everything in the tools. Didn't quite get there, but hopefully you get to see there are a lot of tools that enable you to build cloud apps. Everything integrates with the cloud app lifecycle. And inside the tools, you have a really great way to diagnose your cloud application in the unique ways and the unique behaviors that you're going to find on the cloud. There's a number of resources. Definitely go get the SDK, give us feedback, and I'd love to talk to you this week. Thank you.